Hi everyone, my name is Gina Ramirez. I am a mom first and foremost, and I'm an environmental justice activist from the southeast side of Chicago. If you don't know where that is, it's really far from Evanston, on the border of Indiana, kind of by the Horseshoe Casino. That's like the landmark I give. But yeah, it's a really like amazing place to live, but it's also like really polluted. So there's over 100 industries that dominate the Calumet River. So I often talk about like the tale of two cities of Chicago, how there's like the Chicago River, which they cleaned up so much that you can swim in it now, and then the Calumet River, which is this amenity for industry. So like every day where I come downtown to go to work or to go to school, I catch a bridge because there's like a really huge barge carrying asphalt or pet coke or things like that. So I've been an environmental justice activist for 10 years. I kind of think I always was one though, just growing up where I lived and seeing how the visual blight differed from the downtown of Chicago. So my dad is a jazz pianist. He would often take us on trips to go pick up his paycheck at the Drake Hotel downtown, and I would definitely noticed when I was younger how better it smelled downtown, and that there was trees and like not all this smog and trucks and dust. So I think just from an early age, I became like an environmentalist and went to school, first generation college student, went to DePaul, commuted from the southeast side to beautiful, pristine Lincoln Park, and just saw on the red line like how different Chicago is. So, you know, Chicago's a segregated city, all this stuff. But yeah, I'm telling the story today about lead service lines. It's a passion of mine, and really helping my parents through the process. So my parents have an over 100-year-old home on the southeast side of Chicago. They've lived there for, it's gonna be 50 years actually. And I'm gonna share my story about helping them get lead service line removal. So my parents' house is really old, and from a very young age, they told us to not trust the tap. I could vaguely remember putting my cup under the faucet, but in the 90s, like bottled water became like all the rage, and like my parents just switched exclusively to bottled water. And it's just like a norm in the neighborhood. Like if you go to stores, you look at everyone's cart and they have cases of water. It's just kind of like this unknown thing that folks don't really talk about, in my neighborhood at least, that I've noticed. And so the top picture is actually a photo from my house. I had a baby last year and I was using bottled water to make his bottles with formula. And so Chicago has the most lead service lines in the country, 400,000. The city actually required lead service lines because of the plumbers union up until 1986. And so that, you know, kind of like policy definitely contributed to us having the most lead service lines. And there is no safe level of lead. It's really dangerous for children. So when kids are about 1.5, they get a lead test from the doctor, and it can cause a lot of developmental disabilities. And so if you kind of like layer that on top of living in an environmental justice community, like the stakes are not in your favor. And so that's also like why I'm really interested in this work, because I always talk about like the cumulative burden and the health disparities in my neighborhood. Also, it's expensive. Bottled water, like if you're thinking about $5 like for a case for a week, like that totally adds up. I mean, my parents were buying bottled water for like 40 years. I mean, how many thousands of dollars is that? So it's just definitely a financial fairness issue. So I like to think about the broader equity and justice dimensions of this because I am a sociologist. And so lead service lines totally disproportionately impact communities of color and low-income communities. And so the example of this through the research is the top 10 zip codes in Chicago with the highest lead levels have a majority of Black and Latina residents. And there was an article that came out a few years ago where they did some water testing, And in South Chicago, where I live, basically, they had some of the highest lead levels in Chicago. So I don't really believe in coincidence, just from like my personal experience as an environmental activist. There's definitely like a correlation there. But it's like so expensive to replace a lead service line in Chicago. It's upwards to $30,000. So this isn't like a problem that you could fix overnight. Like people are struggling to survive and not thrive. And this is definitely like a luxury to try to replace this lead service line. So folks are just keeping them in. I bought a house 2 years ago. The inspector was like, you have a lead service line, but you're fine. So there's definitely like this, people are very desensitized about it as well. So Chicago is trying to do something about it. You know, there's a lot of groups and activists really trying to get the city to replace these lead service lines, but it's expensive. And there's not a lot of funding for it. But there are a few programs within the city of Chicago. There's the Equity Line Replacement Program, where if you meet income requirements, you can get a lead service line replacement. There's this initiated replacement where, you know, you get like $5,000 off. Like, that's not really like a big deal. And obviously the daycare lead service line replacement is great. We know that lead, you know, can have all these developmental disabilities in children. So, you know, obviously like home daycares should have their lead service line replaced. So when I found out about these programs, I was like, told my mom, who is on disability, she's retired, and was like, you should totally like sign up for this Equity Line replacement program. My nephew is living with her. At the time, he was like 11 years old. And yeah, we decided in 2021 to try to go for this program. It took 2.5 years. It was utterly ridiculous, the amount of red tape and paperwork that the city put my parents through to get this replacement. They wanted the deed to her house, a copy of it, a copy of my nephew's report card. They wanted her utility bills. They wanted a copy of my mom's license, and there was a moratorium on expired licenses at the time because it was a pandemic, so we had to like put her in a wheelchair, take her to the DMV to get a, you know, valid license. And so I started complaining about it and was like, this is completely wrong. Was on like WBZ and like all of that. And the whole process, that was horrible, like the red tape. But then you also have to give water samples. And so my mom finally got to the water sample part. 2 years of like the back and forth with all the paperwork. So excited that she got to the water sample portion where the city mails you these 2 empty liters, and then you leave them on your front porch. The city picks them up and they test them. So that was in the fall of 2022. She didn't hear anything. That was, she heard something in February of 2023. So almost like 6 months later, they call her up after I have been vocal about the whole process. And they're like, hey, great news. You're eligible for the lead service line replacement. She never got the results of her water. And they're like, we're gonna come out tomorrow. And we need to go in your basement. And so she's like panicking. She's lived in this house for like 50 years and she has a bunch of stuff and she's trying to clear the way. So the city came out, two gentlemen, like an engineer and a plumber, and they had to test the paint in the basement for lead. And they also had to run a camera through her line to make sure that there was no blockage. So previously, this is a separate topic, but similar, flooding is a really huge issue in my neighborhood and water infrastructure fails. My mom spent $10,000 to get a sewer line replacement before this. So she was like, well, thank God I had all that work done. But, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm sure other people like don't have that work done, and does that impact the lead service line replacement? Still don't know the answer to that, but they said, okay, we're gonna drop the plans, and we have to get it approved by the city, and in 6 weeks we'll reach out to you for your lead service line. It was 6 months later, again, and there was how she found out that she was getting her lead service line replaced was the city put a notice, a Department of Water tow zone sign on her tree. And I call her up and was like, are you getting your lead service line replaced? Because like it says you can't park. She's like, I don't know. I think I am. So she called and they're like, yeah, we're gonna come out tomorrow. And this is a photo from the actual lead service line replacement that Vanessa took. It took 2 days, probably about like a dozen staffers. They actually did not, they cut the actual lead service line, which is a little bit more this way. And they opened up a new hole into my parents' house and put the copper line. And they, it's like all this protocols at the city though. Only the water department could shut off the water main and they could put it back on. So it's just kind of like a lot of bureaucracy and a little bit overkill. But I could see why it was so expensive because of all of the like plumbers and all of the city workers doing the work. But it took 2 days. It didn't take that long. And so for all of the work that we did, it just didn't seem to add up to me. But at the end of the process, they gave my mom, the instructions to flush your water. And then they told her, now you have like a $30,000 improvement to your home, which my mom was happy about. And I'm happy for her about that. And my parents are aging, and then like, now my dad doesn't have to carry like these huge cases of water in, and like they're on a fixed income, and now they're saving a little bit of money. So bittersweet process, but there's definitely like room for improvement within the city of Chicago on this. And so this is my son Miles. Here's some like recommendations I have about streamlining the process and making it better through my lessons learned through this experience. Is there needs to be block by block full lead service line replacements, because how many times have we seen like water mains getting like work done on streets, and then they're like they weren't knocking on doors to ask like, hey, while we have the water main open, like let's do the lead service line replacement. So I think it's starting to happen now, but common sense is not so common, and it wasn't being done before. We need to prioritize public education and, tap into the community expertise. They're the ones who know what like water infrastructure problems are happening, or, they know like how to best socialize and educate this issue to their peers. And we need to ensure all residents get access to safe drinking water. Now, I know so many folks who are like in that limbo of middle class that like cannot afford the $30,000, but they have like a ton of kids. And it's just like costly to buy this bottled water, and just so unfair that I can't have my children grab a glass and put it under the tap. Like they have to go in the fridge and like get the filtered water. And my oldest son is autistic, and so he doesn't have the sensory motor functions to open up the fridge, get the water pitcher and pour it himself, so there's still like all of those things to take into consideration. And he knows how to put a glass under the tap because he does it at school, because he goes to school on the north side and they don't have a lead service line. And we need equity-focused implementation that really caters to underserved communities who always bear the disproportionate health impacts of all environmental issues. And I really feel like lead service line replacement is, an environmental justice issue. So that's why I'm so invested in this work, and I'm raising my 2 cute Chicago kids. So of course I'm gonna like advocate for this day in and out. But that's my little presentation. If you have any questions.